My name is Viola, and I'm 61 years old. 3 months ago, my husband William passed away, leaving me with more than just grief. He left me $29 million, a lakefront house, and a vineyard I never told my son about. When Brandon and his wife Stephanie invited me to dinner last week, asking me to sign over everything, I simply smiled and reached into my purse. That decision saved me from the biggest betrayal of my life. Before I tell you how this unfolded, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If you've ever had to protect yourself from family greed, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story will show you why silence can be your greatest weapon. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. William and I built a life together over 32 beautiful years. We met when I was 29 and he was 32, both of us stumbling through a crowded bookstore in Boston on a rainy October afternoon. He was reaching for a book on software engineering. I was grabbing the same book thinking it might help me understand my students better. I taught middle school science back then. Our hands touched on that book's spine, and he looked at me with those kind blue eyes and said, "You take it. I have a feeling I'll see you again." He was right. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony by the lake, just family and close friends. William worked as a software engineer then, but he had bigger dreams. He talked about starting his own company, creating something meaningful. I believed in him completely. When Brandon was born a year after our wedding, William worked even harder. He wanted to build something that would secure our future, give our son opportunities we never had. The company started in our garage. I remember those early years, William hunched over his laptop at 3 in the morning, lines of code reflecting in his glasses. Brandon would toddle into the room, and William would scoop him up explaining algorithms to a toddler who just giggled and pulled his father's hair. Those were lean years, but they were happy. We ate simple meals, drove old cars, and counted every dollar. But we had each other, and that felt like everything. Then slowly the company grew. William hired his first employee, then 5 more, then 20. By the time Brandon was 10, the company had contracts with major corporations. William never changed, though. He still drove the same truck, still wore jeans and flannel shirts, still made pancakes every Sunday morning. When a large tech corporation offered to buy his company in 2018, William sat me down at our kitchen table and asked what I thought. The offer was substantial, life-changing. I told him to follow his heart. He sold the company 2 months later. We moved from Boston to Wisconsin, settling near Lake Geneva. The house was beautiful but not ostentatious. 3 bedrooms, large windows overlooking the water, a garden where William could work with his hands instead of a keyboard. He also purchased a small vineyard in Napa Valley as an investment, something he said would grow in value over time. We visited it once a year, walking through the rows of grapes, breathing in the California sunshine. Those were peaceful years. William had achieved everything he worked for, but he remained humble, generous, grateful. Brandon grew into a man during those years. He went to college, got a degree in business, moved to Seattle for work. We were proud of him. When he introduced us to Stephanie 2 years ago, we welcomed her into our family. She seemed nice enough, polite, attentive. They married quickly, a small wedding in Seattle that William and I flew out to attend. I remember watching Brandon say his vows and thinking how much he looked like his father. But there was something in his eyes, something restless that William never had. I pushed the thought away. He was my son. I wanted to see only the best in him. Last November, everything changed in a heartbeat. William was outside working in the garden, planting bulbs for spring flowers he would never see. I was inside making lunch when I heard a thud. I ran out to find him collapsed on the ground, his hand still gripping the trowel. I called 911, performed CPR, the way I'd learned in a teacher training decades ago, begged him to stay with me. But William was already gone. The paramedics said it was a massive stroke. He didn't suffer. That was supposed to comfort me, but it didn't. I was 61 years old, and suddenly I was alone. The funeral happened a week later. Brandon and Stephanie flew in immediately, staying at the house with me. I moved through those days in a fog. People came, offered condolences, brought casseroles I couldn't eat. Brandon handled many of the arrangements, and I was grateful. He seemed genuinely devastated, crying at the service, holding my hand. Stephanie stayed close, too, making sure I ate, answering the phone when I couldn't. I thought in my grief how lucky I was to have them. 2 weeks after the funeral, George Patterson, William's attorney, called me into his office. George had been William's friend for 20 years, a steady presence through all the business dealings. I sat in his leather chair across from his mahogany desk, and he pulled out a thick folder. "Viola," he said gently, "I need to go over William's will with you." I nodded, expecting to hear about retirement accounts and life insurance. What George told me instead made my head spin. William had left me everything. $29 million in investment and savings accounts, the house in Wisconsin valued at $2.8 million, the vineyard in Napa Valley worth $4.5 million. I stared at George, unable to process the numbers. We'd lived so modestly. I knew William was successful, but I had no idea he'd accumulated this much wealth. He was very careful with money, George explained. He invested wisely, lived below his means, and never touched the principal. He wanted to make sure you'd be taken care of. Then George handed me an envelope. "He left this for you. He asked me to give it to you privately." I opened it with shaking hands. William's handwriting, clear and strong, filled the page. "My darling Viola," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to leave you. I know you're probably shocked by the amount I've left. I never told you the full extent because I didn't want money to change how we lived. We were happy with simple things, and that's what mattered most." The letter continued, but one paragraph made me catch my breath. "I have one request, my love. Don't tell Brandon about the money right away. Watch him first. Observe how he treats you, what he asks for how he behaves. Money changes people, even good people. Make sure he's worthy of this legacy. If he is, wonderful. If he's not, protect yourself. Trust your judgment. I always have." I looked up at George, tears streaming down my face. "He knew something," I whispered. George nodded slowly. William was a wise man. He loved Brandon, but he wasn't blind. He saw patterns that worried him. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. "What do you suggest I do?" Exactly what he asked. "Wait. Watch. And in the meantime, we'll keep everything confidential." I drove home that day in a daze, William's words echoing in my mind. When Brandon called that evening to check on me, I told him what we'd agreed I would say. "Your father left me with a retirement fund and life insurance. I'll be comfortable. You don't need to worry." Brandon sounded relieved. "That's good, Mom. Dad was always smart about money." I hung up and stood in the kitchen William and I had shared for years, looking out at the lake. The winter sun was setting, painting the water gold and pink. I felt utterly alone, and yet, in a strange way, William was still guiding me. I would do as he asked. I would watch and wait. 1 month after the funeral, Brandon called to say he and Stephanie were flying back to Wisconsin for a week. "We want to make sure you're okay, Mom," he said, "and we can help you sort through Dad's things if you're ready." They arrived on a cold January afternoon. Brandon hugged me tightly at the door, and I held my son, breathing in his familiar scent, wanting desperately to believe everything would be fine. Stephanie kissed my cheek, carrying a plant she said was for brightening the house. They settled into the guest room, and for the first day, everything seemed normal. We talked about memories of William, looked through photo albums, cried together. But on the second day, something shifted. We were having coffee in the living room when Brandon asked, "Mom, have you met with Dad's attorney yet?" "Yes," I said carefully. "Everything's been handled." "What did he leave you, if you don't mind my asking?" I kept my voice steady. "A retirement account and life insurance. Enough that I'll be comfortable." Brandon leaned forward. "How much specifically?" The directness surprised me. "Enough, honey. I don't have to worry." Stephanie interjected smoothly. "We're just concerned about your financial security, Viola. At your age, managing money can be overwhelming. Have you thought about getting help?" "I'm managing fine," I said, feeling the first prickle of unease. Brandon persisted. "But Mom, if there are investments, accounts, properties, you might need professional guidance. Stephanie and I have a financial advisor in Seattle. We could connect you." "I appreciate that, but I'm all right." I saw something flicker across Stephanie's face. Disappointment? Frustration. It vanished quickly, replaced by a concerned smile. "Of course. We just want to help." The conversation moved on, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, money kept creeping into our discussions. Stephanie mentioned how expensive Seattle had become, how difficult it was to keep up with the mortgage. Brandon talked about work challenges, investments that hadn't panned out the way he'd hoped. They never asked directly again, but the implications hung in the air. One afternoon, Stephanie suggested I should sell the house. It's so big for one person, Viola, and the upkeep must be exhausting. You could move into something smaller, maybe closer to us in Seattle. I love this house, I replied. Your father and I chose it together. I'm not ready to leave. Brandon added, but practically speaking, Mom, it makes sense. You'd have less to worry about. I'll think about it, I said, though I had no intention of leaving the home William and I had built. That evening I went upstairs to get a sweater from my bedroom. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard voices from the guest room. The door was slightly ajar. I should have announced myself, should have kept walking, but something in their tone made me stop. Your mom must have more than she's letting on, Stephanie was saying. William was loaded. Everyone knew that company sale made him rich. Brandon's voice responded, I know, but she's not talking. We need to be patient. Patient. Stephanie's voice rose slightly. We're drowning in debt, Brandon. That house payment is killing us. We need that money now, not eventually. I'll figure it out, Brandon said. She's my mother. Everything will come to me anyway when she passes. Eventually isn't soon enough, Stephanie insisted. We need to push harder. Convince her to give you power of attorney or something. My hand gripped the stair railing. The room spun. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the child I'd raised to be kind and honest, and he was counting down the days until my death so he could inherit. I backed away quietly, went downstairs, and sat in William's favorite chair. My hands trembled. The pain in my chest was physical, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. William had known. Somehow he'd known this might happen. That's why he'd warned me. That's why he'd asked me to wait and watch. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I went outside, pretended I'd been in the garden. When I came back in, they were in the living room smiling at me, as if that conversation had never happened. Brandon asked if I wanted to watch a movie. Stephanie offered to make dinner. I played along, but inside something had broken. That night I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with William, staring at the ceiling. My son was waiting for me to die. My son, who I'd loved unconditionally, who I'd sacrificed for who I'd believed was a good man. The realization was devastating, but alongside the grief, something else began to grow. Resolve. William had protected me even after his death. Now I needed to protect myself and his legacy. The next morning, I told Brandon and Stephanie I wasn't feeling well, that I needed some time alone. They left 2 days earlier than planned. Brandon hugged me goodbye, told me he loved me. I hugged him back, but the words felt hollow now. As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, I knew what I had to do. The day after Brandon and Stephanie left, I called an old friend in Seattle. Linda had known our family for years. Her daughter and Brandon had gone to school together. If anyone would know the truth about Brandon's situation, it would be Linda. Viola, I'm so sorry about William, Linda said when she answered. How are you holding up? I'm managing, I said. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How are Brandon and Stephanie doing financially? There was a pause. You don't know. Know what? Linda sighed. They're in trouble, Viola. Bad trouble. They bought that house 3 years ago, way above what they could afford. Brandon wanted to impress his colleagues, I think. The mortgage is crushing them. And Stephanie, well, she likes the finer things. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, spa treatments. She's maxed out multiple credit cards. My stomach tightened. What else? Brandon invested heavily in a startup 2 years ago, convinced it was the next big thing. It folded within 6 months. He lost everything he put in, around $200,000. They've been trying to keep up appearances, but everyone knows they're struggling. I thought you knew. No, I said quietly. I didn't. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you. But Viola, if they're asking you for money, be careful. I love Brandon, you know I do, but he's made some really poor choices. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my house and felt anger wash over me. Brandon had lost $200,000 on a foolish investment. He and Stephanie were living a life they couldn't afford, drowning in debt they'd created themselves. And instead of telling me, instead of asking for help honestly, they were plotting to take everything I had. I thought about the years William and I had scrimped and saved, how we'd eaten cheap meals so Brandon could go to a good college, how William had worked 80-hour weeks to build his company, how we'd lived modestly even after the sale, because we valued stability over status. Brandon had learned nothing from us. Or worse, he'd learned and simply didn't care. The next day, I called George Patterson. "I need to see you," I said, "as soon as possible." We met at his office that afternoon. I told him everything. The overheard conversation, what Linda had revealed, my growing certainty that Brandon would try to manipulate me out of my money. George listened, his face grave. "William anticipated this," George said. "He didn't want to, but he saw the signs. Brandon's attitude toward money, his spending habits, his lack of financial discipline. That's why he wrote that letter." "What do I do?" I asked. George leaned back in his chair. "You need to protect yourself and William's legacy. I recommend setting up a charitable foundation with the bulk of the money, something in William's name. Then create a trust for Brandon with strict conditions. He can't touch it until he's proven he can handle money responsibly." Over the next 3 weeks, George and I worked together to restructure everything. We established the William Thompson Educational Foundation with $20 million. The foundation would provide scholarships for underprivileged children to attend college, something William had always cared about deeply. The foundation was irrevocable. Once the money went in, it couldn't be taken out. It would help thousands of kids over the years. $5 million went into a trust for Brandon, but with conditions. He would only receive access when he turned 40. Before that, he had to complete a financial management course, pay off his existing debts using his own income, and demonstrate 2 consecutive years of responsible financial behavior. If he failed to meet these requirements, the money would eventually go to charity. The remaining $4 million stayed in my accounts for my own security and any needs that might arise. The house and vineyard would remain in my name with instructions that upon my death they would be sold and the proceeds would go to the foundation. George had everything notarized, filed, and made legally bulletproof. "Brandon can hire any lawyer he wants," George said. "This will stand. You have every right to do what you want with your money." I signed the final papers on a cold February afternoon. As I put down the pen, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. I'd honored William's wishes. I'd protected what he'd built. And I'd given Brandon a chance to grow up to learn responsibility even if it came late. But I also felt sadness. This was my child. I'd hoped I wouldn't have to do this. I'd hoped William was wrong, that the overheard conversation was a moment of weakness, that Brandon would prove himself better than his worst impulses. But hope wasn't enough. I needed action. "What happens now?" I asked George. "Now you wait," he said. "Brandon will make his move eventually. When he does, you'll be ready." I drove home that day feeling the full weight of what I'd done. I'd essentially disinherited my son, at least in the way he expected. Part of me felt guilty. What mother cuts her child out of an inheritance? But another part of me, the part that had heard him say he was waiting for me to die, felt no guilt at all. I was protecting myself. And maybe, just maybe, I was saving him from himself. That night, I stood by the lake and watched the sun set over the frozen water. The sky was brilliant orange and purple, the kind of sunset William loved. I imagined him standing beside me, his hand in mine. "I did what you asked," I whispered to the wind. "I watched, I saw, and I took care of it." The wind whispered back through the bare trees. In my heart, I knew William was proud. March arrived with melting snow and the first hints of spring. I'd settled into a routine, keeping busy with the foundation work, planning the scholarship program, connecting with schools. George introduced me to a board of directors, and I found purpose in this new mission. Every day I thought about the kids who would benefit from William's generosity, and it eased some of the pain of his loss. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Brandon. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice cheerful. "How are you doing?" "I'm well," I replied cautiously. "How are things in Seattle?" "Good, good. Listen, Stephanie and I were thinking of coming to visit soon. We miss you." "That would be nice. Actually, we were hoping to take you out to dinner. There's something we'd like to discuss with you." My pulse quickened. "What's it about?" "Oh, just some family things. Nothing bad, I promise. How about this Saturday? We'll fly in Friday night, take you to dinner Saturday evening. Our treat." I knew this was it, the moment George and I had prepared for. "All right," I said. "Saturday works." "Great. and we'll pick you up at 6. There's this nice place in Milwaukee we've been wanting to try." After he hung up, I sat holding the phone. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't afraid. I'd done everything I needed to do. Now it was just a matter of seeing it through. I called George immediately. "Brandon just invited me to dinner Saturday. He says he wants to discuss something." "He's going to ask you to sign something," George said. "Probably power of attorney. That would give him control over all your assets." I figured. "Are you ready for this, Viola?" "I am," I said, and I meant it. The next 2 days passed slowly. I went through the motions of daily life, but my mind was on Saturday. I thought about what I would say, how I would handle it. Part of me wanted to cancel to avoid the confrontation, but I'd come too far to back down now. Friday evening, Brandon called to say they'd landed and checked into a hotel. He didn't ask to stay at the house this time, which told me everything. They wanted to keep some distance, maintain control of the situation. Fine by me. Saturday, I spent the day preparing. I pulled together copies of all the legal documents, the new will, the foundation papers, the trust agreement. I put them in a large envelope and tucked it into my purse. I chose my clothes carefully, a simple black dress, the pearl necklace William had given me on our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look dignified, strong. At 5:30, I stood in front of the mirror. My hair was more gray than brown now. Lines creased my face, earned through 61 years of joy and sorrow. But my eyes were clear, determined. This was my son, and I loved him. But I loved myself too. And I loved the memory of William enough to protect what he'd built. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. I opened it to find Brandon and Stephanie standing there, both dressed nicely. Brandon wore a suit. Stephanie had on a cocktail dress and expensive jewelry. New jewelry, I noticed. Diamond earrings I hadn't seen before. Another purchase they couldn't afford. "Mom, you look beautiful," Brandon said, kissing my cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart." Stephanie hugged me. "Ready for a nice dinner?" "I am." We drove into Milwaukee in Brandon's rental car. The conversation was light, superficial. Weather, traffic, plans for the summer. No one mentioned William. No one mentioned money. Not yet. The restaurant was upscale, the kind of place with white tablecloths and wine lists that needed their own table of contents. We were seated by a window overlooking the river. Brandon ordered an expensive bottle of wine without looking at the price. I noticed, but said nothing. The waiter brought menus, and Brandon insisted I order whatever I wanted. "This is our treat, Mom. Get the most expensive thing on the menu if you want." I ordered a modest salmon dish. They both ordered steaks. Appetizers arrived, then salads. We ate and made small talk. The tension grew with each course. Finally, after the main dishes were cleared, Brandon set down his wine glass and cleared his throat. "Mom, there's something Stephanie and I want to talk to you about." I folded my hands in my lap. "I'm listening." "We've been worried about you, living alone in that house, managing everything by yourself. It's a lot for anyone, especially after losing Dad." Stephanie nodded sympathetically. "We know he left you comfortable, but at your age, handling finances can be really overwhelming." "I'm managing just fine," I said calmly. Brandon continued, "We know you are. You're strong, but we want to help. We've been thinking that maybe it's time to simplify things for you." Stephanie pulled out a folder from her purse. "We talked to a financial advisor. He recommended something called power of attorney. It's a legal document that would let Brandon help manage your money. You'd still own everything, of course. He'd just handle the day-to-day stuff. Pay bills, manage investments, that kind of thing." Brandon slid the folder across the table. "It's all standard. We had our lawyer draw it up. If you sign this, I can take care of all the financial stress for you. You won't have to worry about anything." I opened the folder, slowly reading the document inside. It was comprehensive power of attorney. If I signed, Brandon would have complete control over every account, every asset, every dollar I owned. He could sell the house, drain the bank accounts, do whatever he wanted. I looked up at my son. "This gives you control over everything." "Only to help you, Mom, to make your life easier." "What exactly would you do with this control?" Brandon hesitated. "Well, for starters, we'd consolidate your accounts, make everything more efficient. And honestly, we've been thinking you should sell the house. It's too much for you. You could move into a nice condo, something more manageable, or even move to Seattle, be close to us. And the money from selling the house?" "We'd invest it wisely," Stephanie said quickly. "Make sure it grows." I set the document down. So let me understand this. You want me to sign over control of my finances, sell my home, and trust you to manage everything. Brandon smiled. Exactly. We're family. We want to take care of you. I reached into my purse and pulled out my envelope. Before I respond to that, there's something I need to tell you. Brandon's smile faltered slightly. What's that? Your father left me more than I told you about. Stephanie leaned forward, eyes brightening. How much more? I placed my envelope on the table. $29 million plus the house, which is worth $2.8 million, and a vineyard in Napa Valley worth $4.5 million. The silence that fell over our table was absolute. Brandon's face went pale. Stephanie's mouth opened slightly. $29 million, Brandon finally said. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father asked me not to. I pulled out William's letter, holding it up. He left me this. He asked me to wait to watch you to make sure you were worthy of his legacy. Brandon reached for the letter, but I pulled it back. He was right to warn me. Do you want to know what I heard when you visited in January? Brandon's face flushed red. Mom, I don't know what you think you heard. I heard you tell Stephanie that you were waiting for me to die so you could inherit. I heard her say you needed the money now. I heard you both discuss how to manipulate me. Stephanie started to protest. That's not what we meant. I held up my hand. Please, don't insult me by lying now. I opened my envelope and pulled out the legal documents. I've spent the last 2 months working with your father's attorney. $20 million has been placed in an irrevocable charitable foundation. It will fund scholarships for children who need them the way your father would have wanted. Brandon's face went from pale to ashen. You gave away $20 million. I didn't give it away. I invested it in your father's legacy, in helping others. That's our money, Stephanie burst out. I turned cold eyes on her. No, it was my husband's money. Now it's mine, and I decide what to do with it. Brandon's voice shook. What about the rest? $5 million is being held in trust for you, Brandon. His face lit up with hope. $5 million. Okay, that's still... You'll receive it when you turn 40. If and only if you meet certain conditions. Conditions. I pulled out the trust document. You must complete a financial management course. You must pay off your current debts using your own income, not the trust money. And you must demonstrate 2 consecutive years of responsible financial behavior. If you fail to meet these requirements by the time you're 50, the money goes to charity. Brandon stood up abruptly. You can't do this. I already have. It's done. Legal. Irrevocable. Stephanie stood too. We'll get a lawyer. We'll fight this. Go ahead, I said calmly. Everything was handled by George Patterson, one of the best attorneys in Wisconsin. Every document is legal and binding. You'll waste money you don't have fighting a battle you can't win. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. Whether from anger or genuine emotion, I couldn't tell. I can't believe you did this. You're my mother. I am your mother. I said, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. And because I'm your mother, I'm trying to save you from yourself. By stealing my inheritance, by protecting your father's legacy and teaching you a lesson he apparently failed to teach you when he was alive. Money isn't everything, Brandon. Character is. Responsibility is. And right now, you have neither. Stephanie grabbed her purse. This is unbelievable. After everything we've done for you. Done for me. I stood now, looking her directly in the eye. You've done nothing but count my money and wait for me to die. Brandon's face crumpled. That's not fair. Isn't it? You said it yourself. I heard you. Eventually everything will come to me when she passes. Remember saying that? He couldn't meet my eyes. I picked up my purse and my envelope. The remaining $4 million is mine to live on. The house is mine. The vineyard is mine. When I die, they'll be sold and the proceeds will go to the foundation. You will get your $5 million if, and only, if you grow up and learn to handle money responsibly. I pulled out enough cash to cover my portion of the dinner and placed it on the table. Thank you for the meal. I'll take a taxi home. Brandon reached for my arm. Mom, please, don't do this. We need that money. We're in trouble. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. Then get yourselves out of trouble, the way your father and I did, by working hard, living within your means, and making responsible choices. That money won't save you, Brandon. It'll only enable you to make bigger mistakes." Stephanie's voice was venomous. "You're a selfish old woman." "Maybe I am," I said, "but I'd rather be selfish than foolish. Goodbye." I walked out of that restaurant with my head high. My hands didn't shake. My steps didn't falter. I called a taxi from the lobby and rode home in silence, watching the city lights blur past the window. When I got home, I sat in William's chair and let myself cry. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because it had come to this. Because my son had forced me to choose between protecting myself and giving him what he wanted. Because the child I'd raised had become someone I barely recognized. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief, strength, pride. I'd done what William asked. I'd protected his legacy. And more than that, I'd protected myself. At 61 years old, I'd stood up to manipulation and greed and chosen my own path. The weeks following that dinner were quiet. Brandon didn't call. I didn't expect him to. George checked in regularly, making sure I was all right. The foundation work kept me busy. We held our first board meeting and began the process of setting up the scholarship application system. Working with passionate educators and community leaders gave me purpose. I joined a book club at the local library, made friends with 3 women around my age who'd all experienced loss and come through it. We met every Thursday discussing novels and more often discussing life. They knew about my situation with Brandon. They didn't judge. They understood that sometimes love means setting boundaries, even painful ones. In April, I started volunteering at the community center, helping kids with science homework twice a week. Being around young people again reminded me why William and I had valued education so much. These kids were hungry to learn despite having so little. They deserved the scholarships the foundation would provide. One evening in early May, 3 months after the dinner, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Brandon. "Mom, I'm sorry for how I acted. You were right about everything. I've been thinking a lot. I enrolled in a financial management course like the trust requires. Stephanie and I are seeing a counselor. We're trying to fix our mistakes. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted you to know I'm trying." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond immediately to tell him I loved him, that I was proud he was taking steps. But another part of me remembered his words in that guest room. Eventually, when she passes, I typed a simple response. "I'm glad you're working on it. I love you. I'm here when you're ready to talk honestly." His reply came quickly. "I love you too, Mom. I'm sorry I disappointed you and Dad. That was all. No requests for money, no manipulation, just an apology and a promise to try." It was a beginning. Maybe not the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but a beginning nonetheless. Over the following months, Brandon and I started talking again. Short phone calls at first, carefully neutral. He told me about the financial course, about the debt repayment plan he and Stephanie had created, about the counseling sessions where they were learning to communicate better about money. He never asked about the trust or the foundation. He seemed to understand that topic was closed. I didn't know if it would last. I didn't know if Brandon would truly change, or if this was just another performance. But I'd learned something through all of this. I couldn't control his choices. I could only control my own. And I'd chosen to protect myself, honor William's wishes, and give Brandon a chance to become the man his father hoped he could be. By September, when the leaves started turning gold and red around the lake, I felt different, lighter. The grief over William's death was still there, would always be there, but it no longer consumed me. I'd built a new life, one with purpose and meaning. The foundation had awarded its first 10 scholarships. 10 kids who might not have gone to college were now enrolled pursuing their dreams. I stood by the lake one evening watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. A year ago, William had been alive. A year ago, I'd been someone's wife, comfortable in my identity, secure in my future. Now I was a widow estranged from my son, navigating a world I'd never expected to face alone. But I wasn't weak. I wasn't helpless. I'd made hard choices and lived with them. I'd stood up to manipulation and greed. I'd honored my husband's legacy and protected what he'd built. And most importantly, I'd learned that real strength isn't about holding on to people at any cost. Sometimes it's about letting go, setting boundaries, and choosing your own path. A year from now, who knows where I'd be? Maybe Brandon would complete his requirements and we'd rebuild our relationship on healthier ground. Maybe he wouldn't, and we'd remain distant. Either way, I would be all right. I had my home, my foundation work, my new friends, my purpose. I thought about that dinner when Stephanie had called me a selfish old woman. Maybe I was, but I'd learned that sometimes selfishness is just another word for self-preservation. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. I wrapped my sweater tighter against the evening chill and turned to go inside. Tomorrow I had a foundation meeting. Next week I was volunteering at the community center. Next month the book club was taking a trip to Chicago. My life wasn't what I'd planned. It wasn't what I'd expected. But it was mine, built on truth and strength and hard-won wisdom. And that I was learning was more than enough. I'm 61 years old, a widow, and worth more money than I ever imagined I'd see in my lifetime. But the real wealth isn't in those bank accounts or that trust fund or even the beautiful house William and I chose together. The real wealth is in the freedom I found when I stopped letting fear and obligation control my choices. When William died, I could have ignored his letter. I could have told Brandon everything right away, handed over the money, and hoped for the best. That would have been easier. That would have kept the peace. But it also would have betrayed William's trust and enabled Brandon's worst impulses. Instead, I chose the harder path. I watched, I waited, and when the truth revealed itself, I acted. Was it painful? Absolutely. Did it cost me? My relationship with my son, at least temporarily. Yes, but it also saved me from being manipulated, controlled, and ultimately left with nothing. The foundation now serves 50 students a year with plans to grow. Those scholarships will change lives, create opportunities. Honor Williams' belief that education can transform the world. That's his real legacy. Not the dollars in a bank account, but the impact those dollars make. As for Brandon, I genuinely hope he succeeds. I hope the financial course teaches him discipline. I hope the counseling helps him and Stephanie build a stronger marriage. I hope that when he turns 40, he'll have earned that trust money and will use it wisely. But whether he does or not, I'll be all right. I've learned to stand on my own. Some people might say I was too harsh. That family should forgive everything, give chances, endlessly, sacrifice personal well-being for the sake of keeping everyone together. But I've learned that's not love, that's enabling. Real love requires boundaries. It requires accountability. It requires the courage to say no when yes would cause more harm than good. I think about William every day. I miss him terribly, but I'm grateful for that letter he left me. It was his final gift, his last act of protection. He knew I'd face a test, and he gave me permission to be strong. In doing so, he taught me something I'd never quite understood before. You can love someone deeply and still refuse to let them hurt you. Those two truths can coexist. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone different than the woman who opened that envelope from Marcus Jensen so many months ago. I see resilience. I see wisdom earned through heartbreak. I see a woman who chose herself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival. The lake is freezing again as winter approaches. Soon it will be a year since William's death. I'm planning a small memorial at the lakeside, just me and a few close friends. We'll share stories, light candles, remember the man who was so much more than the money he left behind, and life will go on. The foundation will grow. Brandon may or may not earn his trust. New scholarships will be awarded. I'll volunteer, read books, watch sunsets, and slowly build a future I never planned but have learned to embrace. People ask me sometimes if I'm lonely. The truth is, I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference. I have purpose. I have friends. I have work that matters. And I have something I didn't have before. I have myself fully and completely not defined by my role as wife or mother, but as Viola. Just Viola. Strong, flawed, doing her best, making tough choices, and living with the consequences. If I could go back and change things, would I? Would I want Brandon to have been different, to have passed William's test, to have deserved that inheritance without conditions? Of course. Every mother wants to believe the best about her child, but I can't change him. I can only change how I respond to him. And I chose to respond with strength instead of weakness, with boundaries, instead of blank checks, with truth, instead of comfortable lies. That choice saved me. It gave me back my life. It honored William's memory. And it taught me the most important lesson of all. At 61 years old, I'm not done growing, learning, or becoming who I'm meant to be. Loss can destroy you, or it can remake you. Betrayal can break you, or it can teach you. Money can corrupt, or it can serve. The choices are always ours. The power is always within us. We just have to be brave enough to claim it. So here I stand, 1 year wiser, 1 year stronger, looking toward a future. I'm building one choice at a time. The $29 million is no longer mine in the way people think of ownership. It's working in the world, changing lives, creating opportunities. The $5 million waits for Brandon, a test and a gift all at once. And the portion I kept ensures my security and independence. William left me more than money. He left me a choice. And I chose me. I chose truth. I chose strength. And I've never looked back. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family over money? Have you had to make a choice between keeping the peace and protecting yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about navigating family loss and finding strength when you need it most. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to honor those you've lost, and never too late to choose the life you deserve. May you find the courage to set the boundaries you need and the wisdom to know when love means saying no. Take care of yourselves, protect what matters, and remember that your worth is never determined by what you give away. Until next time.